While scientists presented sustainability as an urgent issue to the UN many decades ago, it was only a couple of years ago that Greta Thunberg stepped forward and the world at last sat up and listened. Her message of a changed way of life and sustainability as the main argument for saving the Earth moved decision makers and was cheered on by large parts of the world's population, not to mention nature's greatest friend, Sir David Attenborough. Today, the biggest trend driving the auction market is precisely this: sustainability. Alongside sustainability, trends as cultural heritage, earth and nature, reinterpretation and playfulness stand out. That is, if you believe the data and research behind the Catawiki 2022 Trends Report. In today's episode of Eye of the Beholder, we interview Sophie Clauwaert, Manuel Quiring, Eléonore Floret and Tombeur. We start talking to Sophie Clauwaert about cultural heritage, art with a message. Only those who know where they come from know where they're going to, Theodor Heuss, the first German federal president, said a few decades ago. Does this quote roughly reflect this trend?
Absolutely. Because of course all art and all art objects, they are being made in a certain context. And today is anchored in yesterday. So you can say that the objects made in the past really reflect the context, the socio-economical context, the religious context of the past. So it is very important. Of course, it's also important to know that the status of the artist changed over the centuries, being first in the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th. Artists were more seen as craftsmen, like Rubens working in a big workshop, being helped. It was more like an industry almost, if I may say so. And this changed completely during the 19th century, when an artist was regarded as an individual, putting his own emotions, putting his own point of views on the society, reflecting the society through his artworks. So it's an important evolution we did see. But one can say that an artwork is always reflecting a certain context, a certain society. And maybe to give you a specific example, a recent example in contemporary arts, there is this Dutch street artist called Fake. He has even been branded the new Banksy by some. And he recently painted at the beginning of last year, so the very beginning of the pandemic, he painted the super nurse in northern Amsterdam on a wall. And the day after, the image, crossed the world, was shared on Instagram everywhere. It's basically a photo of a nurse, but presented like a Superman. And of course, it's a homage to, the medical people working in the medical world, really doing everything they could to, push back that pandemic. And we were very proud, of course, at Catawiki, because that was one of the artists we were already representing. And so, yeah, of course, we managed to grow him even more through the platform, through Catawiki. So that's an excellent example of also how our customers are really looking for artworks that convey a certain message.
The focus here is first of all on old masters and antiques, though. Is this about the longevity and value of these objects that have survived for centuries, you think?
Yeah, amongst other things. Of course, in the last few years, there's been a lot of eyes on incredible auction results. You know, of course, in 2017, I believe, the sale of the Salvator Mundi, which some are like contradicting this nowadays, but attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, then some Rembrandts as well. So this is big news, big headlines. And I think this, of course, contributes to the fact that people are getting more and more interested again in old masters. So what's an old master? An old master can be a painting, a drawing, work on paper by an artist living between the 14th and up to the beginning of the 20th century. became a bit neglected at some point of time, because many people thought that it's, these things are too expensive, they can't afford it. But looking at platforms like Catawiki, it helps to make lesser known names known. And these lesser known names can show incredible quality sometimes. Take some artists from the 18th or the 19th century, landscape painters, portrait painters, who may not be like in all the history books, but who are still really interesting and also affordable for customers to buy. I think what makes these paintings as well is the provenance, because every old master painting carries with it a whole history about the sitter who is represented, about who it was made for, who it was commissioned for, which collections did it go through. And of course, that's part of the package of an old master. It's not just about the painting, but just more broadly as well about the provenance and the history. And that's, I think, what entices people today into buying these pieces of history in a way. They're also wonderfully, adaptable in an interior nowadays, because you can really combine them with, modern and design, which is really cool.
Is that also why the trend is alive today for modern and contemporary art?
Yes. However, I would say for modern and contemporary art, there might be other elements at stake. As I just said before, of course, the status of the artist got changed throughout the century, specifically in the 19th century with Romanticism, the artist really becoming an individual, being able to put his own passions and viewpoints on society in the arts. And if you look at modern art and also contemporary art later, it's all about currents and countercurrents really reacting onto each other. And it really accelerated since the end of the 19th century up until now. So you saw Cubism coming up, Fauvism, Cubism, Futurism, and those were actions and reactions every time on what was happening in society back then. And that's so wonderful about modern art. And it's also because at Catawiki, we have a very big department in modern art. We sell around 4,500 items every week. And these items range, there's all sorts of styles, currents, countercurrents. We have pop art, we have street art. You can have sales on Nouveau Realisme, Surrealism, etc., etc. And of course, this is an incredible mirror of society, of the past and the present. And the present, with Fake, is an excellent example. But you can also look to tomorrow with upcoming young talents that are also proposing through the platform, because since last year, we opened a department called Direct from the Artist. And we're working directly with young and upcoming talents who, of course, also are part of this contemporary society.
So here the statement stands above the aesthetic standards, but quality certainly also plays a role, as is the case with many of the other trends, right?
Quality is very important indeed, because of course you can have an artwork with an interesting subject matter, but that's not, just the reason why the artwork would be good. And of course at Catawiki, that's where the expert steps in, because he can really make the difference in just looking for an interesting subject matter or an artwork combining both. Again, maybe referring to the Direct from the Artist auctions that we launched recently. We have a team of 6 people there who, on a daily basis, look at young and upcoming artists and really make, that kind of choice in putting them to auction or, not accepting them, which is not an easy task, of course. And it really requires a good eye and good skill in curation. To give you an idea, since the beginning of this whole, setup, this whole department, we have sold works from more than 3,600 artists. And the subject matters can be very varied, but often we do see indeed that there is a message in there about contemporary society, about what's happening in society. And we also do see that these are often the more successful works that get sold in our auction. So it really shows that our audience is looking for something that's reflecting what's happening in society nowadays, and especially with the latest events, this is reinforced, I believe, just because those things are real witnesses of, what's happening. Art is giving their own point of view as well, and that's being very sought after.
Do you think we will see a great change because of COVID? I mean,
in what sense?
No, I mean with both motif, but also maybe technique, how you present the art. And
look, there is quite an interesting evolution going on since a few months, even the last year. Art up until 2020, let's say, was always like contemporary art was always super contemporary, even minimalist, using, maybe objects from daily life, being abstract, etc. And now recently, what I've seen also we see it at Catawiki in the DF direct from the artist department, but we also see it in most of the art fairs, is the comeback of figuration. And that's something quite unexpected. It's almost like people go back to something that they know, that they feel comfortable with. It could also have something to do with having a new type of audience coming up. Millennials are the people, buying more and more. They're the upcoming audience. And they're looking a lot at art from the 90s, for example, to invest in or to spend their money on. Why the 90s? They grew up in the 90s. And also, I think the 90s, if you compare it to today, the 90s are a period of a lot of peace, a lot of economic stability, which we we're kind of losing today. So I think it's kind of nostalgia in that sense.
Interesting.
So only the future will really tell what's coming up. But those are definitely some interesting evolutions we also see on the platform. Something that's really coming up at the moment and has been since the past few years, it's not a new trend, it's contemporary African arts. Whilst until recently, it was only Western art that was being talked of, also in the history books. Now we are also really opening up a place for contemporary African artists and African art. And that's a great thing. And I'm sure that's something that's there to stay from now on.
Oh, definitely. A collecting area, an upcoming trend that will grow during 2022 is earth and nature and fossils. Manuel Quiring, you are a natural history expert. As with reinterpretations, is concern about our planet the reason behind this trend as well?
Well, sure it is. I think we're currently constantly reminded of the impact one species can have on a whole planet's ecosystem. So I think this leads to a certain curiosity towards our planet's history and its past living worlds. And I think also a certain lust for disaster and perhaps also reassurance plays into this. So there have been major extinctions events before, and life tends to always find its way. So if you now hold something in your hand like a dinosaur tooth, which has once a million years ago been an apex predator in its world and is today not much more than a chicken. So I think this holds a certain fascination in itself, which we can strongly observe also in our dinosaur auctions at Catawiki.
And what other reason do you think fossil hunting as a hobby is growing?
So I think if you look into the people that are currently active, so the people that are earning money, building their homes and seeking to define themselves over their passions, I think there you see a strong change of generations. So today, mostly Generation X and millennials are active in especially the auction world, or even if you look into online auctions. And I think these generations, they grew up with Jurassic Park and the Jurassic World sequels. So everything related to dinosaurs and fossils is like one of their oldest passions. And I think this changes the field dramatically, since these generations have quite different approach towards expressing their passions. So this brings the collection out of the dusty drawer or cabinet right into your living space, just to openly showcase what you are passionate about. I think this is a dramatic change we're seeing.
But there are also celebrities are also showing interest in collecting these natural occurring treasures. Can you tell us some more about that?
Yes, yeah. There's always the story of Nicolas Cage, who famously outbid Leonardo DiCaprio on a dinosaur skull. But also quite fresh. It was reported that Kate Winslet became an avid fossil hunter in the preparation towards her latest movie Ammonite, in which she plays Mary Anning, a famous 19th century fossil hunter and a role model for women in science until today.
Do you think that has an impact on the new kind of collectors?
Yes, I think you always have like these role models. If you see what famous people are collecting or spending their time, I think this has always an impact on society at all. Yes.
Have you noticed a growing interest with fossils influencing interior design and furniture as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think it beautifully connects our desire to bring a part of nature into our homes. So natural textures and colors, but also the strong contrasts and vivid colors ammonites, for example, can showcase. So if you think, for example, of an iridescent ammonite that has the whole color palette of a rainbow or whatever, I think this makes an absolutely beautiful centerpiece in your living room or in your desk. And I think this trend is currently also being accelerated by a new generation, as we spoke about, not only of collectors, but also of fossil dealers who made their passion a job and provide beautiful objects themselves of high quality that are ready to be presented in your home. So they actually care a bit more about the presentation of the collectible. So they provide beautiful handmade stands. So and there you have a link to this handicraft and trend again. And that's something we observe everywhere. So even if you look to classical, very successful galleries on BRAFA, so the Brussels Art Fair, and you see more and more fossils entering the field of art and ancient galleries.
So they become more like sculptures with a contemporary expression, but with a very historical, how do you say, value.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's something I've been waiting for a long time.
Yeah.
So that's something I've been always pushing for when I entered the field. Like we have to get this out of the drawer and make it presentable and nice. So,
as it once was, actually.
Yes,
some generations
absolutely,
ago. Yeah. Eléonore Floret, a clear trend is reimagined sustainable design. So, is this trend based on the increasing awareness that our planet is not an inexhaustible source of resources that we can use to make new things?
Well, in design, the concept of reimagining is not new. It is in the essence of design to be influenced by previous shapes and techniques to create new objects. And the success for several decades of flea markets, antique shops, or more recently of platforms like Catawiki is the proof of our desire to reuse old objects in a new interior or with a new function. Nevertheless, I think that we now see an exponential rise in this trend. It's taking a very specific direction, and it's mostly due to our increasing awareness that our planet is not an unlimited source of resources. We see an increasing desire to change our ways of consumption, impacting our understanding and ways of buying design. We want to buy less and better, focusing on the quality, perennity, and provenance of the objects.
And what about the desire for individuality then?
Yeah, that's a good question. The desire of individuality is essential in design, obviously. Even if we look at inspirations in magazine, Instagram, or in our friends' interiors, we are all looking for a space that represents our unique taste. Every object is carefully selected and has a very particular history. And the pandemic obviously had a big influence also on that. We are spending even more time at home, and we need to feel even more comfortable and in symbiosis with our surroundings. So yes, this is really very, very important. And as a design expert at Catawiki, I'm really attached to this because our platform is an unlimited source of inspiration, and we are always looking for exciting and unique pieces. So maybe to give an example here, in contemporary design, we are creating from March 22 a new monthly auction called Direct from the Designer. This auction will offer a great opportunity for well-known and emerging designers to present a selection of their pieces, mostly unique and limited edition. And it's a great chance to buy pieces that no one else has and coming directly from the creators. So that's also very, very exciting, I think.
And this was actually the answer of my third question. What is sustainability's role in this trend when it comes to specifically contemporary design?
Yeah, I'm really excited about contemporary design. I'll be honest on that. So when it comes to contemporary design, sustainability has a central role to play. It is now mandatory to implement changes in our ways of production and how to think the materials. But most of all, we need to reevaluate our needs. And this without putting into question the functionality and the beauty of the object. So this is a very difficult question. And even if we see a clear acceleration nowadays, it is a long process and production channels needs to be changed, also techniques. So I think it's really exciting and for a good challenge for designers, opening unlimited imagination and creativity possibilities. And maybe the most interesting thing is that there are so many ways of approaching this subject when we talk about design and furniture. Maybe I can select 3 of them just to give some example about this. So the first one clearly is upcycling. It's the most famous, I think, meaning it is the reusing of discarded materials to create the new improved objects. For example, designers are using trash materials from factories or recycling centers instead of the traditional materials providers. And this is also a very interesting approach because it allows designers to develop a more local connections, which is also a very important part of sustainability. And for example, in September, we had a very interesting partnership auction with the Paris Design Week on the question of sustainable design, especially. And it was really interesting to see that all the designers participating were working with discarded materials, even if their approach was not exclusively upcycling. So really, the question of discarded materials is one of the basics of this new contemporary design on sustainability. But for me, maybe the most exciting approach is the question of new materials. So those designers that are working on this question usually have double formation or are working closely with physics and biological experts to improve some already existing materials or create new ones. So that's really, really interesting and so into the future in a way. So for example, for some time, we have been presenting some pieces designed by a young designer named Stephen Akul. He is making coffee cups made from a special recipe of glass foam that he developed. He is using discarded glass powder, and by cooking it in a mold like a ceramic piece, he is able to create a foam with thermal and sound insulation properties. So it's really, really cool in a way. And maybe the last element that I should mention, because I think it is really important, we need to think about that nowadays even more, is that some designers are having a more social approach, and they try to support and include certain marginalized populations. For example, the association Take Care, with whom we did some auctions in the past, they used to present in our auction a selection of pieces from European designers, so designed by European well-known designers, but made thanks to the savoir-faire and techniques from Egyptian women from shanty towns. So it's a really exciting mix of knowledge to do something even better in the end.
So, but how is vintage design also part of this upcoming trend?
Yeah, we should not forget vintage design, obviously, and it has a very important role to play in for new and more conscious design. The first element that we all think about is that buying vintage pieces is an excellent way to limit our consumption of new objects, and it's helping the battle against overproduction. So that's obvious. And as we mentioned earlier, buying vintage design has always been a central part in the design market. This is not something new, obviously. Nevertheless, we clearly see that in parallel to what is happening in fashion, for example, there is clearly an evolution here. Vintage design is not an aficionados market anymore. Thanks to all those changes, and of course, thanks to the new, more democratic access to objects brought by the internet and platforms, everyone is buying design. You can find exciting pieces for all budgets and every taste. Even if you want to change your interior according to new trends, it's easy to sell and buy something different. So it's kind of limitless. And that's really exciting as well. But we should not forget that vintage design has also some other elements that are really important in that subject. Because it was often thought as something lasting and bringing a unique patina over time to the object, making something very unique and very personal. And it's exciting to see that it is now a source of inspiration for shapes and techniques. And for example, many pieces from the 50s and the 60s were using quality materials and very simple techniques that we have forgotten later because of mass production. And it's now back thanks to the return of the trend of craftsmanship. By using all of those techniques, we can reduce products like glue or plastic. So it's really rethinking the past for the future.
Interesting. Another trend is playfulness and exuberant watches. Tom Tombeur, expert in watches. So as a result of the pandemic, life has taken a very serious turn in all areas. Do people just need something to distract and cheer them up, or?
Yes, I think so. I think a lot of people are looking for something out of the ordinary and something that is maybe a bit more flashy or colorful than they were looking for before. So at watches, we definitely see it that the color of the dial can be much more bright and cheerful than it could be a couple of years ago, so to say. So bright yellow, green, red, it's all possible right now. More and more people are looking for this. And the same thing with the case material. People are not afraid to wear gold anymore. A couple of years ago, it was almost not done, especially as a male, to walk with a golden watch. But right now, more and more people are finding their way into pink gold and yellow gold watches.
And before was stainless steel and platinum, or?
Yes, stainless steel, white gold, platinum were most of the time the preferred choices of metal of the watches. But yeah, we do see a little bit of a shift in there to have it a bit more playful and cheerful.
Bright colors contribute immensely to improving general well-being. In which categories will we meet them, you think?
Yeah, besides watches, I think we also see it with fashion, where brands like Missoni are getting quite some traction with bright colors and very cheerful patterns, basically. We also see it on the wine labels. Also in jewelry, we see it quite a bit, where the colored stones are also gaining a lot of traction.
But when it comes to fashion, will that both be colors but also patterns?
Yes, we do see quite some flower prints and also prints with very bright colors, almost like modern art, both in the accessories like handbags as in the clothing itself.
Would traditional watch brands like Patek Philippe and Rolex also be more colorful?
Yes, we see that trend is also moving forward to these classical brands. We see that Rolex is experimenting quite a bit with yellow dials, bright green dials, Tiffany blue dials, and that the public loves it and that they're asking high premiums for these kind of watches. Also, Patek Philippe, which is probably the most conservative Swiss watchmaker out there, now made a Nautilus with a Tiffany blue color dial. And one was sold for charity and the rest will go on production. And there's already a lot of demand for these.
So the more playful watch, Swatch, is that also a kind of wristwatch that are on the secondary market right now?
We don't really focus that much on Swatch watches. We of course the Swatch group is something else, but Swatch watches itself, we don't really sell that much on Catawiki because we see them more as a fashion accessory than really a watch brand in that sense. But I think a brand like Swatch really helped with creating this trend of playfulness, which is basically also a bit of a rehash of trends that were happening in the 1970s and 80s, in which Swatch played a big role. So now the big brands that use the more refined mechanical movements are also going in that direction. So I think Swatch is one of the pioneers in that sense.
Interesting. Are there other reasons beyond the pandemic that would link this playfulness trend to?
Yes, I think so. I think it's not only a pandemic. I think it's also the cycle of how things are going. A couple of years ago, watches from the 1950s and 60s were very much en vogue, so to say, and also a lot of brands were making watches inspired of that era. And those were very nice, functioning, but mainly a bit, I'm not going to say boring, but more very standard watches. While right now we do see that brands are looking a bit more to their 1970s and the 1980s catalog, where we already saw quite some differences in case design, in colors that were used, in materials that were used, and now they are, let's say, using that more as a benchmark for the new collections. So it's not just by the pandemic. I think it's also a natural way of how trends are working, that everything comes full circle.
Exactly. That's true. There's no doubt that most trends in 2022 are about going back in time to face the future.